2, 1, vai.
Hi, I'm Franco Achilli, Academic Director, Raffles Milano. I'm speaking finally from our campus in Via Casati. We are here. Today's guest is a photographer, a professional who has found the dimension of the meaning of his life through the story, the visual witness of what happens around his time. Giovanni Diffidenti is a photographer who has covered all the continents, facing inaccessible places and dangers, threats and human tragedies. He has been where a few decide to go, and he has done it with the task of bringing us stories. He has defied jungles and deserts, hostile metropolises and communities, pandemics in Africa, guerrillas, and natural disasters. His stories are stories on which we report information. We need to feed our knowledge and our point of view, because Giovanni, as a photographer, is a bearer of information and a collector. He collects with his camera the human being and what happens at distances that we personally don't reach. We often think of reporters as reckless photographers who thousands and thousands of miles away from our peaceful life bring us dramatic facts or cultures that we will probably rarely or never intercept in the course of our life. Yet, every day Giovanni collects images that document the state of things. He does it for his city daily, Bergamo, but he's always ready to leave immediately for forgotten places where a visual witness like him can attract the interest of nations, institution, or humanitarian organization, association that can change the state of thinking in that country, in that nation, in that places. This is also sometimes the power of photography. Giovanni is himself a story, which he will tell you himself, because it is a story of pursuit of passion, and how sometimes having vocation can be rewarded by an unexpected and encouraging episode. What I wish also to each one of you. The beginning of his career in London, in the bed of River Thames, seemed like the beginning of a novel. I hope he will tell you himself today. He has produced many photographic books, reportage for United Nations, UNICEF, and humanitarian organizations, international magazines, and newspaper, very important newspaper. The first time I met him, I was so surprised by his sense of discipline that I love so much in the preparation of a travel and reportage. Depending on where he was supposed to go, he would have prepared a plan of physical resistance to hunger and thirst, inconvenience, and efforts. Giovanni is a militant, serious, tenacious photographer. I think he was born with his camera around his neck. I think his experiences in the midst of so many practical difficulties makes him a human and professional exemplary profile. Thank you, Giovanni, for being here with us today and sharing your passion, your work, and your vision of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Franco. I'm not sure if I deserve all this, to be honest with you, but thank you. I really appreciate your introduction. Yes, my name is Giovanni Diffidenti. I'm actually, right now I'm in Bergamo, where you probably heard that the pandemic has done a lot of damages, not only medical damage, but economical damage. But anyway, I will try to tell you a little bit about my story. Born in a very small village grew up thinking about motorbikes, drugs, and rock and roll. That's what my life was before I decided to go to London. And here I am in the station of Milan with my ex-girlfriend. We took a bus which ended up to be a really nightmare because the bus driver could only stop at a certain point, and my poor girlfriend needed to go to the toilet, and I'm afraid the bus wouldn't stop. So you can just imagine the nightmare of this woman who needed to go to the toilet. But eventually we reached London, and here we are, a village boy, ended up in a metropolis city like London, trying to work out what to do, because before my journey to London, I didn't have a clue of what I wanted to do with my life. But anyway, I ended up in London, and as a foreigner, here we go, going to school in a foreign language school in the morning, and in the afternoon, as I couldn't speak a word of English, I ended up doing the dishwashing job. But as soon as I learned how to say carrot and onion, I became a chef. I really wanted to prove myself that I could do it. And after about 8 months working in this restaurant, I realized that these guys were really taking advantage of my wanting to do something with my life. So I gave up the job, and it was during this unemployment time that I started to look around the city, and I was really, really attracted by homeless people. I was really attracted about people with disability. I was really attracted by people being marginalized. And I thought of the camera. And I saw I had a bit of a saving. I bought my first Nikon FG20. And at that time, obviously, we were using roll film. So I started to walk around with my camera. I started to have my very first experience by photographing homeless people. And at one point, I ended up in the bed river of the Thames and trying to do some still life of stones, rubbish, and dead animal, whatever you could find in the bed river. And all of a sudden, I saw something sparkling. And I thought, what the hell is this? So I looked closer, and I realized it was a gold ring. It was a big mother golden ring, big one. And I look at it, and I thought, oh my God, I wonder who this ring belonged to. I was really scared, to be honest with you. I didn't want to keep such a huge ring around my finger. So I went to Soho, and I thought, okay, let me sell this ring. And anyway, I ended up with, I still remember, 156 pounds on my pocket. And it was this money that allowed me to go on for another 2 weeks. And during those 2 weeks, I found my very, very first job in a place where I thought it was a photography studio. Let's show you how much I knew about photography, basically nothing. Instead, I ended up working in a lab where they developed E6 film at that time. And it was just magic. Magic because the client of this laboratory were basically people like Don McCallum, as some of you might know, who's a very famous British photographer. Mario Testino, who's a very famous fashion photographer, and also Lord Snowdon, who was the official photographer of the Queen. And but of course, these people wanted to talk to someone who could speak, as Lord Snowdon says, proper English. But my English was not proper at all. Anyway, I started to work in this place, and my only job was to cut the film slices and put it on their folder. And you can imagine, all day I was just looking at images coming from all over the world. The only film that we didn't develop was pornography, but images were coming from war zone, town area, fashion, advertising, still life, you name it. Anyway, I kept going to school because I wanted to improve my English, and I kept my curiosity about these photographers that were coming in from all over the world, and I started to beginning to talk to photographers that I thought had something to learn from. And there I started to, I just wanted to see whether my career could end up being on the back of a school desk again and learn photography, or trying to work as a photographer assistant. And I ended up working, to cut a very long story in a short one, I ended up working with a New Zealand photographer called Ken Griffiths, who was doing advertising and editorial work. And it was during that time that I learned how to approach people, how to respect people when you have the camera around your neck. At that time, advertising was big, in the sense that we were doing a worldwide campaign for cars. As to give you an example, we ended up in China, we ended up in Greenland. We traveled basically everywhere around the world to do advertising work. But what really fascinated me is the fact that before we were going to the office and deal with advertising agency and clients, me and this photographer will go up, will get up like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We will go around London and photographing homeless people. And I thought the whole thing was very fascinating. I really enjoyed it. And I got to one point that it was actually when I was in China, we were photographing a Volvo car, that I thought, no, wait a minute. I don't really give a damn about cars. I really like the people. I like the culture. Anyway, so I came back to London. I had an offer to work as a photographer for a documentary film that were repatriating the very first Cambodia refugee from Thailand to Cambodia. I worked as a photographer for 3 months. As soon as I reached back to London, I packed my luggage and I moved to Cambodia. And that's where my career as a photojournalist started. So it was during my time in Cambodia also where my very first big project started. And it was about landmine. I mean like landmine survivor more than anything else. And if you just bear with me a second, I will show you something. Here we go. Forgive me for a second. Why is not happening? Sorry about this. Oh, here we go. I got it. Here we go. Okay, basically, my first job when I was in Cambodia was for an NGO called Cambodia Trust. Basically, what they were doing, they were making prostheses for anybody who will lose a leg. At that particular time, Cambodia, and it still is, one of the most land with landmines. So I was asked to take photographs of these people that were coming in the city center, and so I started to talk to them. I started to see how they would fit the prosthesis. I started to see how some people, for the very first time, they could actually walk with a prosthesis. But okay, that was okay for me to doing that. But what I thought was very fascinating is to see how people survive at home. So I asked my client if I could spend some time with them at home. So we organized a trip. Now, don't forget that we're talking about in 1992. Basically, the country was still at war with the Khmer Rouge. And so what happened is the security was an issue. Okay, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you different photographs from all over the world. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to show you some of the images that I managed to collect in the last 20 years. Anyway, what happened is this. So I went out to see these people where they were living in the village, and I realized that although they had a new prosthesis leg, some of them had problem with the prosthesis simply because when they were at the prosthesis center, the muscle of their leg had one fall, but as soon as they started to use the prosthesis, different muscles will develop. So some people will end up with a prosthesis that after 2 weeks, they wouldn't fit anymore. So I came back to my client and I said, listen, I think we have an issue here. Some of these people couldn't even afford a bus ticket to go back to the prosthesis center. So basically, with my effort and with the story that I share with them, they've introduced a part of the project which was like after about a month of delivering the prosthesis, some people will go back to their village and check how they were dealing with the prosthesis. Anyway, my issue with Landmines basically got very, very important in 1994. I was covering the war for Associated Press, and the government wanted to get rid of this Khmer Rouge, and the headquarters was Pailin, which is a city up on the north west side of the country. The government had already tried a few times to take over this city, but they couldn't. So they decided to build a road through the jungle. So what happened, after about 10 days waiting around to get the permission to travel with the troop, finally the commander came up to say to us, okay guys, we are leaving in about half an hour, who wants to join us? We were about 20 of us, but only 3 decided to follow them, and it was me, a French photographer, and a Belgian journalist. Anyway, the journey took about 5 days, but there was one particular day which basically made me realize how lethal these weapons were. And briefly here the story. We were traveling with a tank. It was packed of soldiers, and I was sitting right in the front of the tank with their commander. And following us, there was a truck, a Russian truck, very old one, and it was during the raining season. And what happened is that this truck couldn't get stuck in the mud. So every time he got stuck in the mud, we, photographer, journalists, and soldiers had to get off the tank, and the tank would help the truck to get off the mud. Anyway, it was like the third or the fourth time that this truck got stuck. And obviously what I did, I took some time to take photograph of the situation. And by the time I wanted to go back to the tank was full of soldiers, and 2 people took my place. And when I complained to the commander saying, no, wait, I was sitting here, my colleagues are sitting here, so what should I do? And the commander said, listen, there's no space, you go back to the truck. Anyway, at this situation, you have to obey the commander. Anyway, so I went back to the truck, but only 5 minutes later, I heard a very loud and suffocating noise. And I look up and I saw smoke and I saw bodies all over the place. Anyway, the tank set off an anti-tank mine. The result was we had 2 people killed and 7 wounded. And the 2 people who got killed, they were the one who basically took my place. So you can imagine, the commander came up to me and said, You guys are very, very, very lucky. Anyway, since then, basically I've been documenting landmine survivors all over the world. I'm up to 17 countries and I had exhibitions all over the world. And so that's the story of the landmine. And recently, and then I will come to that, I was asked by a Norwegian NGO called Norwegian People Aid, who was taking part of a pilot peace process in Colombia. And the pilot peace process was about involving the Colombian government and the FARC. FARC, who may not know who they are, is basically a guerrilla group who have been fighting with the government for many years. So this pilot project was about to involve both parties in order to see if a peace process could work. And the peace process was about basically demining a part of FARC area. Now, just to give you an idea, basically nobody could go in the FARC area. It would have been too dangerous, some area impossible to reach. But anyway, so they managed to get me a permission. And so I started to live with them. Basically, we were all camping. We were all sharing the same food. We were all sharing our life stories. And, oh, here we go. Now, I just finished this presentation. And Franco, do you have any?
Yeah, and follow all the pictures, and I prefer that you show your works, and after we open could be a discussion. Okay.
Okay. Now let me see if I'm gonna be a little bit quicker by showing you this. I'm gonna show you another approach. Now, what you saw right now was basically a selection of images from different part of the world, and there was one approach. This approach was basically like, in some cases, living with the survivor. I could give you many examples of stories where I actually stayed with people. I can give you an example of Daoud. He's from Afghanistan. This guy lost both hands and his eyes while he was taking a shortcut and trying to reach a village not very far from where he lived. So basically, I stayed with him for about 6 days. His nephew was basically his eye, and his nephew was also the guy who will feed him. So you can just imagine this guy, no eyes, no hand. The challenging part of this story was that it was done between 1980 and 1999, and Afghanistan was ruled by the Afghanistan. As you might know, Taliban people would not allow photography. So when I first moved to Afghanistan, believe it or not, I spent 1 month in Kabul living with Afghan people without taking a single shot. So you can imagine how frustrating that could be for a photographer. But it was a great learning lesson. It helped me to understand a little bit about the culture. It helped me to understand the body language, because I didn't speak their language, but I could communicate with just very small gesture. And they could understand that the appreciation of their culture, and they could understand what my motives were. And believe me, when you walk into a situation like this, you have to have a clear idea what you want to do. Otherwise, you could be mistaken for a spy. You could be mistaken for anybody. Anyway, the oath was that her mother would read the Holy Quran every single morning to him. And the culture wouldn't allow me to be in a room with a woman. The culture wouldn't allow me, or even better, the Taliban wouldn't allow me to take photo of a woman. But it was by giving them the main reason why I was there that I was allowed to do so. In fact, my main reason was to show how people with such disability could end up. Now, let me think about this one. To show how these survivors managed to live and to continue despite the disability. Anyway, now there was a project and it's still going on, but I want to show you again another work on landmine, but with a different approach. Okay, I'm coming. Just bear with me.
Facciamo.
Hold on a second, I know. Oh, here we go. Now, can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. Now, this was a job that I did in Colombia, in the FARC area. This was more approached in such a way that I wanted to show in which context people live. And as you can see, my approach was to show, okay, where do they live? How do they survive? How do they make their living? Showing also the beauty of the place. One thing very interesting about this work was to see the different approach of the issue. We had one situation where at one point we were traveling around the forest and a tree fell down and blocked the road. And the first reaction on the Colombian government was to take out the telephone and started to film the situation. The approach of the FARC people, at one point one man disappeared in the forest, and about 15 minutes later, he came back with a store chain and started to cut the tree and liberated the road. So that's the approach, basically. The challenging of demining about this area that most of the landmines that were found, they were handmade. As you can see in this one, basically it was a gas tank using for cooking. The FARC people modified the tank and it was made into a landmine. There was one point we found a landmine and it was taken to the lab to see what, there was something very odd about this. And they found out that the container it was used, it was from rat poison. Do you know what that means? It meant that if you step on that one, not only you get wounded, you will get a serious infection and you are, basically it's almost impossible to survive. Anyway, this is a sequence of this deminer working in very tough condition, trying to clear landmine which was basically contaminated by them. Here we go. Let me see. Anyway, we also show the relationship between them. Okay, here we go. Now, let me see. Let me see if I can show you. I recently, well, not recently, but I made a trip to, okay, let me see. 2011, the revolution started in Libya. At that particular time, I was in Congo doing completely something different. So I couldn't really reach the place on the March 17, which was basically the date when the revolution started. But eventually I managed to reach Libya, and that was June. Benghazi was spared. Spent only a few days in Benghazi and moved to Misurata and started to document the war. Anyway, I was in Libya for about a year, coming out only a few days there and then. But eventually, when I went back again in 2018, I realized that Benghazi was totally destroyed. And I managed to get inside, and let's see if I can show you something. Okay. I don't know why he's doing that. I know, bear with me, guys. But it's not opening up. I don't know why. Oh, here we go. I know. I apologize for this. Here we go. The last photographer that managed to get inside Benghazi was 2016. I was asked by someone to see if I could go in, and this wasn't a magazine, this wasn't a newspaper, this was a private person who had been dealing business with Libyan people, and he had the right connection for me to get in. So we managed to get a letter which would allow us to get inside the plane from Milan to Tunis. By the time we were getting into a plane from Tunis to Benghazi, that letter wouldn't be good anymore. So he made a phone call to this contact in Benghazi, and 5 minutes later, we were on the plane going to Benghazi. When we reached Benghazi, it was nighttime. We were, me and him, we were the only two foreigners in the airport. As soon as they saw the camera, they confiscated my camera, and they said, "Where do you think you want to go with this camera?" The situation got a little bit airy, but as only 5 minutes, excuse me, 1 second. 5 minutes later, our contact came, spoke to the custom, and 5 minutes later, we were on the car. We were put in a hotel. You couldn't leave the hotel, and we could only work a couple hours a day. Anyway, when we reached Benghazi, now bear in mind that this city was spared during the revolution in 2011 and 2012, this is the city that I came in front in my mind. More than 60,000 people lived in downtown in Benghazi, and the city was completely empty. This is the very few people who started to clean up the city. This is the Italian embassy, basically completely destroyed. Very few people lived there. This man is watching his hand, but it was a very, very, very few people who lived there. Still don't know how these men managed to survive. Students started to go back to the university, but there was one guy there who showed us a photograph of a telephone with an explosive attached to it. That you will only just need to make a phone call and the whole place will blow up. So people were very, very scared getting to this building. Anyway, I'm going to show the last story. Hopefully I'll be able to make the whole thing work. Okay. I don't know why it's not working. Sorry, guys. Oh, here we go. Okay. This is a different approach how I do story. I found out about this woman who had a dog for the last 15 years. At one point, the dog got disabled. The vet suggested that maybe she should put the dog down, but she loved her dog so much that she waited until the last minute. And I practically spent lots of time with her. And here's a series of photographs. Unfortunately, and this could be interesting, I've never been able to publish this story. Anyway, the dog couldn't walk anymore. And so this lady had to take the dog to the bathroom. She would take the dog everywhere. This is the type of relationship she had with the dog. At one point, the dog had problem even defecating itself. So she had to clean the dog. She couldn't walk anymore. So look, you can see the hair growing up in his feet. She found a way to take her dog around. She could almost feel the dog knew how her owner would think. They still had fun though. This is the memory of when the dog was a puppy. She would take the dog everywhere. They would fall asleep together. At one point, the dog could not even stand up. This is where the dog slept, and you could see she had problem going to the toilet. And at that point, the lady decided that it was time to take a very hard decision for her. The day that she took the decision that she had to put the dog down, she felt sick. This is the last night with her dog. She's a Buddhist, so she decided to pray with the dog. The dog couldn't take any medicine anymore. She was trying to force her, but nothing. Here it's her calling her sister, say, listen, I took the decision to put the dog down. Here at the vet, waiting her turn to go in. This is the final. Now, we were entering this room. The vet, Michaela, who's the protagonist of the story, and me, at one point I realized that there was a tear on the table, and I couldn't work out whether the tear was coming from the vet, Michaela, or me. Here she's sending a message to his friend, and here she's taking the dog for burial. Here we go.
Ok. Alzo la mano. Raccomando, alzo la mano. Vorrei thank you, Giovanni, because all the stories that you gave to us are so important, and I have so many questions. As you know, I know you since how many years, but I have some questions to ask you. For example, this last story give us the role of the photographer, that is a witness, but through his humanity can tell us a point of view, and there is a tenderness, the sense of mercy through the story of this girl and her dog, with the same meaning that you put in reportage, in very tragic scenarios, because it's so important to be able to give back the sense of the stories. And so you can be in the jungle or in a little village in Italy, but the sense of responsibility for a witness is so important. And so thank you for this last story, because I don't know this before. And so for me it's been so important, recognize that you put the same effort and the same sensibility, because it's not enough to be a photographer, and it's so important the point of view. I want to ask you one of the 10 things. One is, for example, and I remember to the students that are listening to our discussion that they can ask in the section Q&A their questions. The first for me is when you receive an assignment, and could be a newspaper or a magazine or United Nations. How long is the period of preparation? Could be that they ask to leave immediately, or you have time, and I know that you prefer to prepare and learn and study the society and the history of that place, for be ready to face the situation, the environment, and be able to realize a relationship with people that you will meet. So, how long is the time that you need for a good preparation to the trip?
Okay. Well, there isn't a preparation as such. The thing is that I like to think that I'm always ready, which means that as far as the physical preparation, like for this morning, I was up at 6 o'clock, and my training section takes about an hour and 15 minutes. This is something that I do every day. So as far as the physical preparation, I could be going anywhere now. Now, taking consideration the fact that I don't have 25, 30 years, 35 years. Now this year I'm going to be 59. So, which means that the time of recovering after a trip, obviously, it takes longer. Okay. So what I'm saying is this: as far as the physical preparation, I'm okay. As far as like getting to know the issue, this could be a problem, because if I go somewhere where I know nothing about it, sometimes can be an issue. But having said that, I have practically worked in every single continent on the world, and if you ask me now to go to Iraq, it's not that I've never lived in a Muslim country. You know, I lived in Libya for a year. I live in Afghanistan. I already work in Iraq. I worked in Bangladesh for 6 months with the minority group. So as far as that, you know, I'm not saying that I know everything, but obviously it's something that I'm always following. Okay, but let me tell you something. When I first tried to go inside Syria, and that wasn't an assignment, but it was my personal interest. This was the time where it was the beginning of people losing interest about the country. So I thought, okay, maybe that's the time for me to go in. Now, keep in mind that when Syria started to be on the news, you could actually go to Turkey's border, and there would be people with minibus taking photographer and newspaper photographer and journalists, taking them to Aleppo. But when I came in, when I went to Syria, it wasn't such things as that. And when I started to talk to my colleague, everybody would say, no, don't go. This is crazy, you know, like Chirico, the Italian journalist just been kidnapped, and a lot of journalists started to get wounded and killed. And but I said, well, you know, I have to have a go. So I started to build my own contact. And even with those contacts, they would say, no, don't go. So there were all the signals for not going to Syria. So I thought, okay, I think here requires a special physical training. So I started to, I bought a bag, okay, and I put all my equipment in there, and I started running with that bag. That was my training. And luckily enough, that training, I think it was something that saved my life, because my first try to go inside Syria, we hired a smuggler that would take us from Turkey to Syria. So we have to go through the mountain, and we were about, I would say, 150 meters to crossing the border when the Turkey soldiers saw us and they started shooting at us. And believe me, you saw me running very, 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 very fast. Believe me, believe me. But at the end,
I believe. But this is a second question because not always you are embedded, and I want to explain to the student that for many photographers are embedded, and so it means that they are incorporated in some group of army, and so they have an authorization to shoot only where the military give exactly what you can shoot and where what you can report to your newspaper. So in this case, the information is so trusted, and you are not free to get the images that you can capture through your point of view. But in this way, you are protected by the armies and you are protected by soldiers. In your specific case, I don't remember how many times you had this protection by the army. You traveled by yourself without protection in the jungles with guerrilla groups. And so, what do you think when you are alone in the jungle without protection, without shelter, without people that give you the right protection for go ahead with your job? So it's not the same relationship that you have if you are with a big protection by armies and soldiers.
Yeah, well, this is what I said before. You have to have a very, very clear idea why you're doing that. Okay, let me give you an example. In 2016, I was asked to go to Sudan, at the south of Sudan, not South Sudan. As you may know, the country was split in half. We have South Sudan and we have Sudan. Okay, there's this group of people called the Nuba Mountain people, and they live on the south of Sudan. Okay, but at that time, nobody were allowed to go there, not even NGOs. So the only way to get in, you have to go to South Sudan, catch the UN plane, go to the nearest refugee camp, okay? And at that time, people from the Nuba Mountain people, they will cross the border and they will take you inside, okay? And just to give you an example, you could only travel at a certain time of the day. For example, if you went in, okay, you will travel during the night, because if the plane saw you, they will just bomb at you or they shoot at you. And the same way was to come out. You have to travel very, very early in the morning, because it was this stretch of road. You had to do it in the dark. But of course, you don't adventure yourself in such a situation unless you have the right connection. And of course, I was dealing with the people who at that time, they were suffering from the amount of human rights violation that the government was doing. And I was very lucky in the sense that the report were coming out that the government from Khartoum, they were bombing this area, but they were never been able to record it, or at least not foreign people never really recorded that. Now, here, of course, we are running into a very delicate situation. Sometimes, if the news comes from the local people, not everybody trusts their news. Okay, so sometimes, unfortunately, you need a foreign person in order to say, "Hey, listen, this is what's happening." So, and what happened is this: I was like in the morning having a soup in the market by myself. Okay, and at one point, a plane came and started to bomb. So.
I'm happy that you are with us today. Thank you.
Yeah, but the thing is, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch was very happy to receive this photograph.
Yeah. Giovanni, we have some questions.
Okay.
Try to find them. You have in your section.
Okay, let me see. What are your tips for photographer to survive through this time of confinement? Very good question. Well, if the person who wrote the question was referring to the COVID virus time, well, I was not in a confinement. I always went out taking photographs, but one thing that I always wanted to make sure, although I had clients who wanted photographs straight away, and I said, no way, because my rule was safety first, in a sense that as soon as I arrive at home, I will put all my clothes inside a washing machine. I will have a shower. I will disinfect my cameras, and only then I will start doing the editing. That's what I will do. Now, here the second one, advice for a photographer who wants to follow a career in photojournalism, documentary photography, how to make connection, aid a magazine. It seems that the market is saturated. It's very saturated. Let me tell you a very short story. I had a journalist who said to me, listen, there is a priest who is going to inside the hospital, and that could be a great story. He walks around with a cross and with agenizer. That's something that you clean your hand, okay? So I said, okay, so I went to the clinic and I said, I want to talk to this priest. And the priest came out and I said, okay, can I do a portrait of you holding the cross and these things to clean your hand? And the press officers of the hospital say, I'm sorry, you cannot go inside the hospital. There's some very strict rule, etc., etc. Now here comes to answer your question. I did the photograph. The photograph was published. I never managed to get inside the hospital. I had to photograph the priest outside. The following week, the New York Times came, and guess what happened? He went inside, of course. Why? Because you're working for the New York Times. So connections are very important. That doesn't mean that you're going to do the photograph in the right way, you're going to do photograph in a sensible way, but connections are very important. And they are always very, very difficult to get these connections. What is the most difficult photo you have taken? I think the most difficult photo that I've taken is the one that I didn't take. And I can give an example. Again, in this trip, when I was following the Cambodian troops traveling through the jungle with the Cambodian soldiers, at one point, the government soldiers decided to bomb the Khmer Rouge area. They were not very accurate, I have to say, when the bombs were landing. And our soldiers realized that, and we were all trying to hide ourselves under the trees, whatever. And at one point, what happened is that I was lying down on the ground, and I saw a Khmer Rouge prisoner with a drip on his arm. And you could see he was looking up in the sky. He was terrified, really, really terrified. And at one point, I pointed my camera, and there was this little noise came somewhere. Who was saying to me, don't take this photograph, otherwise something happened to you. And I've been following this voice. You have to. What camera you've been using? I've been using Canon, but if somebody gives me a free camera, I'll use any camera, no problem. And that's the end of the question, if I'm right.
Okay. So Giovanni, we arrived at the end of our conversation, and I'm thinking always that we have to thank the photographers because we increase our knowledge, we increase information, we have news from the world because someone, the photographer, the journalist, they go on the place and they give back with their efforts, with their activities, something that for us is so important. You know, we are living in a very special scenarios in this period, and without the news, without correct information, we have not exactly what is happening around the world. And through the activity of reporter and photographer, we and video makers too, we have through the news on TV, on newspaper, the information, and we use, and this for me is a little pain because I'm sure that people has not exactly the awareness of the effort that the journalists and the photographer and video makers they put in this job. We are on our sofa, we are on our chairs in front with a dinner plate in front of TV, we are around the city with a newspaper or a magazine, but beyond each pictures, beyond each article of the newspaper, there is a man or a woman that is giving something of their background and effort for inform us and go ahead. So for me, from my point of view, and you know so well, for me, thank you very much because you are a witness. You give us information with your effort, and every price of the pictures is not exactly the value of that picture because yeah, you know how many times we discuss
sure.
the picture because you produce an artifact that is realized not only for to be a story but to be a job and of course a product because we sell also news, information, and pictures and video clips. But for our students, for our young professional designer, I think that this kind of discussion, this kind of talks are so important for understand well the value of the things, your behavior, your job, and how much is so important your job in our times. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for giving me this.
Please remember, my friend, take care. Remember, please.
I will, I promise.
Thank you very much to all our students and people in this moment. The next appointment will be next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Italian time. So thank you very much. Bye from Raffles, Milano, in Via Casati. We come back. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Ciao,
Bye-bye.
Joe.
Ciao.